and the beat of feet sounds over the land. Heroes, every one. Heroes by the million. Men who abandon home and vocations that they may be ready to defend democracy if necessary.
1 in 10 Americans worked in the armed forces during World War II. Nearly everyone knew someone deployed into the war. The Green family, highlighted in this video, had 6 family members fighting the battle, all of whom survived the war. My mom, Sally Palin, now Sally Hargraves, was only 5 years old when the war began, and it had a profound impact on her life. This video is dedicated to Sally, our mom, grandma, aunt, sister, and cousin, as well as to these extraordinary family members who served. Mom's ability to keep these memories alive allows the rest of us to understand World War II through a perspective that is very personal to our family. And it helps us all to never forget. Please enjoy.
My name is Jack Green. Okay. I'm retired from what is now the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, D.C., but where I was a member of the curation staff and later the public affairs officer. And I was the first public affairs officer in the Department of Defense that dealt with historical things and museums.
My name is Linda Green Dion, and I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I'm Jack Green's daughter, the first Jack Green, as opposed to cousin Jack Green.
I'm Sally Winifred Palin. I was born 89 years ago next month. I was named after my mother's favorite aunt. That would be Grandma Winifred Green's sister, Sally. And I was also named after Grandma because her middle name was Winifred. And I am the oldest of her, she and Grandpa Green's 11 grandchildren. The youngest is Bobby Allen, that's Jack's brother.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
I remember that day very well, even though I was only 5, only because of the emotion of everybody and how everybody reacted to that. We always went to Grandma's house for dinner, and we were all sitting around the table, and Grandpa Green, for some reason, went to the basement, and I'm not sure why, and the radio was on, and all of a sudden comes across this Pearl Harbor has been bombed by the Japanese. And as I recall, Uncle Bob ran to the basement door to tell Grandpa to come back upstairs and listen to this broadcast. Well, when everybody was told that Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, everybody in that dining room stood up. You know, there was Uncle Bob, Uncle Jack, Aunt Lee. Uncle Errol was there that day, my dad, my mother, and I. We were there for Grandma's dinner. And everybody all said the same thing. Well, we're at war. We're going to join up.
Leroy Ulysses Green was born in Brockton, Illinois on November 7, 1887. He was born the son of James Asbury Green and Virginia Gillis Green. Leroy, or Buck as he was known to family and friends, was one of 5 children. His father was a prominent businessman in Brockton, owning the general store, the lumber yard, and a large farm about 7 miles from town known as the Old Green Homestead. Leroy was an affable man and lived a quiet life working for his father. He married Lucy Winifred Pickering, and they had 8 kids, 5 girls and 3 boys. One of their girls, Millie, died as an infant in a tragic accident when she rolled off a bed and became stuck between the bed and wall and suffocated. Roy, Buck, Grandpa, whatever you called him, he was an adored father and beloved grandfather who died too young in 1952 at only 65.
I have many, many wonderful memories. My first memory of Grandfather Green was when I fell down the stairs and he scooped me up and wouldn't let anybody touch me. And he was a very loving man. His sister Maud married Otho Manfred von Henn from one of the better families in town. There was plenty of money there. And she married him in 1913. They dropped the von after the First World War because it's definitely a German term. And Uncle Otho, having plenty of wherewithal, purchased the house in town and the homestead, the Green Homestead farm, so that Aunt Maud would have those in her family, which they did until they both passed away. Uncle Otho had left Brockton a couple of years after he went to college and became what we would call now a CEO at the Michigan Inspection Bureau. Everybody in this family worked for him. Almost all of the siblings, my mother and father, their siblings, myself, my husband. He did a good job as a CEO. He was valued and respected by everyone in that industry, and he ran a tight ship. But he was an altruistic person, and a lot of people don't know that. They had no children. He and Maud had no children. He took a few boys, and I'm not sure how many. I met several of them over the years, especially when I worked there. But he paid for their way to college and then brought them to Detroit and gave them jobs at the Michigan Inspection Bureau. Over the years, he had donated money to the city of Brockton that they had built a community center with his name on it. And I think probably also the senior citizen building was because of his altruism. But he was well known and well liked by the people of Brockton. And when he died, October 11th in 1969, I think that he left a big hole in the family and the town of Brockton because his family had been so good in Brockton.
My mother, okay, well, she reads an ad in the paper saying they needed elevator operators at the Cadillac Tower building in downtown Detroit. My dad is working at the bureau at the 40th floor of the Cadillac Tower building. Okay. And he takes the immediate attraction to her, and he would wait until her car came open to jump on the car and talk to her. Okay. Once she gets married to Dad, Uncle Otho hires her into the bureau. Okay. But asks her to keep her maiden name because there are already too many Greens on the payroll. Everybody worked at the bureau. Okay.
I've heard.
So, yeah, so, Uncle Otho hired everybody.
I know, Mom, you're fighting with me. Ever since I got your last letter, I've been thinking of your end of the war. Thinking of you rolling those bandages. helping to build up the blood bank. We know how you're going without things so as to buy just one more war stamp or one more bond. Say hello to Mrs. Carney, who organized the canteen down at the station. And Mrs. Gallagher, who's a-working on the railroad. Say hello to Mrs. Zabinski. Tell her I think she's a good soldier, too. Tell every woman in our town, from one soldier to another, that I'm proud of them all. Yes, you're all good soldiers, Mom.
Lucy Winifred Pickering was born in Brockton, Illinois in 1886. She was the third child of 7 for Lucy Jane Nugent and Andrew Jackson Pickering. According to a newspaper clipping from Brockton, the only graduate from Brockton High School in 1903 was Miss Winifred Pickering. Her graduation oration was, "What hath the Mediterranean seen?" And it was delivered with such grace and ease that bespoke a careful training during her high school years. She was a busy mother, wife, and community activist. She wrote and published a book called The Red Triangle. She also wrote several movie transcripts, and though they were submitted to Mary Pickford, they were not accepted. After leaving Illinois and moving to Detroit, she remained a homemaker and community activist. She joined the DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution. When war broke out in 1941, she threw herself into whatever she could do to contribute to the war effort. She was a member of Moms of America, the local canteen, the Civic Study Club, the Red Cross, and others who rolled bandages. She wrote letters for wounded soldiers, passed out donuts and coffee to military coming through the railroad stations, and took in any stray soldier or sailor that any of her boys in the service brought home. She was very proud when the Detroit newspapers interviewed her because of the flag hanging in the window with 6 stars representing her children serving in the military. After the war, they moved to a small apartment, and after Grandpa died in 1952, she moved to California to live with Uncle Errol and Aunt Lee until her death on January 30th, 1970.
Grandmother Green was a very, very loving woman. Anything good about me, I got from Grandmother Green and her influence. During the war, their house was the headquarters, so to speak, for all of us to come and live when our men, when her daughters, husbands that were in the service were overseas or away, we always went back to Grandma's to live. There was ration cards. So each family got a ration card per person that they could buy butter, meat, certain groceries type things. And when that ran out for the month, you didn't get it again. I mean, that was it. You didn't get it till the next month. So Grandma Green took charge of everybody's ration cards. One of the things that was my job, everything that came in tin cans, you revaluated the cans. They came and picked them up. And after they were rinsed out, then you stomped on them until they were flat. They were repurposed for use again. Of course, my biggest problem was I had no bubble gum, and that was tough, being a kid and no bubble gum, good grief. But we as kids participated. We bought stamps for 10 cents, and we bought turned the stamps in for, our parents turned the stamps in for bonds, so that was always a help. She joined so many organizations. I mean, I could sit here and name a bunch of them. And Jack can reiterate the story that he heard also from his father that happened while I was living in the house. Uncle Bob was coming home on a furlough, apparently. And on the train coming home on the furlough, he met a sailor. And the sailor had no place to go. And Uncle Bob said, "You come to my house." Now, keep in mind, there was probably Mom and me and Betty and her 2 kids, and then Grandma and Grandpa, and then whoever else happened to be staying there at that time. And this young man came to the house with Bob. She gave him her bedroom on the first floor. And she was a little apprehensive about it. She said, we don't know. Now, she didn't say this to him, but she said it to my mother. I'm a little apprehensive about, we don't know anything about him. We don't know who he is. Is this a good idea? Well, the next morning, when she went in her room where he had been sleeping to make up his bed, all of his things, all of his wallet, everything was laying on top of the dresser. And she decided if he could come in her home, put all of his money, all of his belongings that he had, he was all right. So he was there for a day or two, and then he went on about his business. But that was the kind of person she was.
Wishing well, I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day. In everything that's light and gay, I'll always think of you that way. I'll find you in the morning sun, and when the night is...
I never met Grandpa Green. I did meet Grandma Green, and it was always about going to Grandma's house, that kind of thing, and getting a really huge comfort food meal, that kind of thing. Good, Grandma's good old homemade noodles. I remember everybody trying to recreate her recipes. Never happened, because those were the days they grabbed a handful of this and a handful of that, and if it felt right, it was good to go. I guess I'd have to say my dad was pretty darn close to my grandmother. When my father died, he had not changed any paperwork out of my grandmother's name, because of course he assumed she would precede him in death, and then he would transfer everything to my mother's name and myself, and how that goes. But that never happened. So that was just kind of a I don't know, an instance that I remember at the time of his death.
Looks like I'm back in the movies again, doesn't it? Well, as a matter of fact, I like to do some talking. Now, make no mistake about this thing, fellas. We're all going to be in this war soon, sooner than a lot of you realize. The Army Air Forces need 15,000 captains, 40,000 lieutenants, 35,000 flying sergeants. Just make out that application for the Air Force Reserve. It's here that lasting friendships are made, because you and your teammates are aiming for the same goal. That big, beautiful, wonderful V that spells victory. Now, what you're going to see next isn't considered exactly a part of the regular training course. You find out the effect those shiny little wings have on a gal. And it's phenomenal. And now it begins. The roar of 100,000 motors sing their song, and theirs is a song of freedom. But somebody's got to fly it. A lot of somebodies have got to fly it. Now, this is your place. This is where you'll serve America best. Young men of America, your future's in the sky.
Jack Eldon Green was the seventh child of Leroy and Lucy's 8 children. He was born November 2nd, 1918. Everyone remembers that all Jack ever talked about while growing up was learning to fly. After high school graduation, Jack joined the Navy because they had a pilot program in Grosse Ile, Michigan. When America was attacked in 1941, Jack was able to join the Army Air Corps, which was in its infancy, but had a fledgling aviation program. He married Virginia Carl from Detroit, whom he had known since youth, and they had one child, a daughter named Linda Lou. Jack was only 49 years old when he and Virginia were out shopping, and just after they returned home, he dropped over from a massive heart attack and died. He received a missing man flyover during his funeral.
Jack, that's the G.I. jive. Roodle-de-toot, jump in your suit, make a salute. Voot.
The Green family was very much involved in World War II. It affected them very much. And the Air Force was the most glamorous service to be in at that time. In fact, Dad told me a story that when he was going into the Army at Michigan Central Station, Grandmother Green was crying and said, well, at least he won't be in the trenches.
We were living in Lancaster, California, and I believe he was still stationed on a base, but got out because I'm not sure about his discharge date. But he was an aeronautical engineer, so his military experience carried over into his engineering. And most of what I remember is, the aeronautical things, the astronomical things that he did as a profession. Of course, I saw, the trunks full of uniforms and medals and, memorabilia and so forth. But most of what I learned about my dad really was from his 13-page resume from back in the day, which really didn't necessarily give a lot of detail of his military career. Of course, it included his military career. I was too young to understand anyway. So I remember, the military presence and, two uncles and an aunt and my dad being in the service. Tom Palin was already gone. I never met him. And I don't have a lot of detail other than remembering my dad. The antics on the films and things are very much things that I remember. And that was the kind of guy he was and all that.
They give you a private tank that features a little device called fluid drive. Jack, after you revive, chunk all your junk back in the trunk, fall on your bunk, clunk.
Uncle Jack was a very accomplished young man for his time. He had a pilot. He was a member. He had been in the civilian pilot training program, which was a New Deal program to train young men and women too. Women were part of the program too, to make them more aviation conscious and to be pilots. And he had a private pilot's license as a young man. He was going to college. He owned a car, which in the late 30s or 40s for a man in his late teens, early 20s was quite an accomplishment. A very accomplished fellow at that time.
Pilot Jack Green tells of night with buzz bombs. Lieutenant Jack A. Green, son of Mr. and Mrs. Leroy Green, Prevost Avenue, previously awarded the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross, has been presented the Presidential Citation and an oak leaf cluster at a formal review. Jack pilots a C-47 paratrooper carrier. At present, he's working between Belgium and England. He writes very interesting letters. In his latest one, he said, "I arrived back on the field today after spending quite a disturbing night on the continent. It seems so peaceful here in England now, after sweating out 31 buzz bombs last night while sleeping in my plane. I was flying along yesterday somewhere in Belgium when a buzz bomb drove straight across the nose of our ship. I could see it so plainly that I could notice that it was all silver and had some sort of blue design on the fuselage and wings. It was traveling very fast. That will give a good idea of how close we were to it. I watched it as it dove to the ground where it hit two large brick buildings. There was a terrific explosion, a huge cloud of dust and smoke, and the buildings were no more. The blast even racked my plane as I flew directly over the destruction. I was in an active area for buzz bombs, and from then on, I tried figuring the percentage of chances of a buzz bomb hitting an airplane in flight. I finally decided this was pretty low and the odds were in my favor. However, as soon as I got on the ground, I changed my mind, and so did the odds. I had to remain on the field that night, and I certainly didn't enjoy it. The AC gunners said 31 came over that night, and I didn't get any sleep at all. The sirens would ring, and then I would start sweating out the motor of a buzz bomb. One of them came too close to suit me. I could hear the motor, which was very loud this time, and it was directly over the plane, and that is where the motor quit. After the motor quits, there's a loud swoosh as it dives straight down. This swoosh became louder and louder as it came down, and I could have sworn it was coming right down on top of me. The bomb hit with a terrific explosion less than half a mile from where my plane was parked. The concussion rocked my plane and knocked the air vents out of all the windows in another plane. That is calling it close, and believe me, I just laid in my bedroll and shivered and prayed because I knew there were many more to follow. I hope I never have to stay overnight at that place again.
This is a model of the markings of the fighter group that Uncle Jack was in. He was in the 486th Fighter Squadron, 352nd Fighter Group. Now, he never flew with them. Okay. What had happened was during the Battle of the Bulge, Bastogne, which I've been to and I was stationed in Germany eons ago, was surrounded by the 101st Airborne Division. His unit, the 437 Troop Carrier Group, was assigned to assist the 101st Airborne. Okay. When the weather cleared, they dropped supplies by parachute into Bastogne in Belgium. It's in Belgium. Okay. While he's flying the plane, he has an appendicitis attack. He's flying the plane. Okay. Plane gets back to England. He is sent to a general hospital and they do an appendectomy on him. Okay. While he's in the hospital recovering his transfer, he had been originally trained as a fighter pilot, but they had too many fighter pilots. They needed pilots in the Troop Carrier Command, so he was assigned to Troop Carrier Command. He was very unhappy about this because I want to be a fighter pilot. So he kept on putting in for transfers. Well, while he's in the hospital recovery, a transfer comes through. So he's assigned to the Blue Nosers at Bodney. Okay, but the flight surgeon would not pass him to fly again. He said, "You're still recovering. You're still recovering." So he's at Bodney. He's around all the fighter pilots. This is what he wants to do. And the war ends. So he never flies a P-51 in combat in the 8th Air Force, which is what he wanted to do. Now, he later flies in the Michigan Air National Guard, and my dad's the maintenance officer in that. Okay, so, but he ends up, and in fact, in his logbooks, he doesn't fly again until like September 1945 after the war.
Mom and Dad, I've tried to write this before, but have torn up quite a lot of paper. I feel I must say something. You've heard what General Eisenhower said to his pilots. I will ask for all you have. You will get little sleep and food for weeks. I do not doubt it at all. I know what lies ahead. If it should come to the last final effort, I want you to remember that I wouldn't have had it any other way, whether fighters or not. Flying has been a part of me all of my life. I guess you've always known that. I hope you will always be proud of me and remember that I love you all very, very dearly. I am not scared now, but I know I will be. I will know when my stomach rises up into my throat and the palms of my hands become wet. It has happened before, and I've seen it happen to others. However, I accept it all. I think I accepted it a long time ago when I watched the large model de Havilland of Ralph Conlin's Takeoff and Fly for the first time away, back on Tuxedo and Petoskey. I guess I just had to fly. I hope you will never regret it and not hold it against me, but just remember that I am much happier than I believe I could ever have been otherwise. I have a wonderful mother and father, and I am immensely proud of you both. I'm sorry if this proves to be a blue letter, but I felt I had to say something. I don't know how I could ever repay you for all you've done for me, but if my little home in the West becomes a reality, maybe that will help in some small way. I received your card just a few hours ago, Dad, and it was truly one of the finest things I've ever received. Thanks a million. Distance is a small word to the ties that bind. Your devoted son, Jack.
When the movie The Longest Day was coming out, okay, this is 1963. And so I said, yeah, I want to see The Longest Day. I want to see The Longest Day. And Dad says, well, your Uncle Jack, he actually dropped some of the paratroopers on D-Day. I go, he did? Oh, yeah, he did. Oh, yeah. I said, I got to see this movie. Okay. And she says, and he crashed his plane. When they crashed his plane. His plane crashed. Okay. So Uncle Jack, the year before he died, came to Detroit. He and Linda and Virginia, and Uncle Jack was staying with us. Okay, so of course Uncle Jack, tell me about D-Day. I heard you crashed your plane and stuff like that. So I said, what happened? Tell me all about this. Okay, what was happening was this. Okay, he was there were serials, which were formations of C-47 transport planes that were going over France and dropping these paratroopers. He was in serial 10. Now, if you saw the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, okay, this is what he was doing. He was the co-pilot of one of the planes. There were clouds, and it was very cloudy, and they had a hard time dropping the paratroopers. So they were coming back. Well, his base was overcast, clouded in, so they had to go to another base, and it was cloudy. It was stocked in too, but it seems that they could land. So they're coming in on instruments, okay, and they break out of the overcast over the runway, and here's another C-47 right below them. Now, the SOP, the standard operating procedure this is a tail dragger airplane. So they have waves of airplanes coming back that they have to land very quickly. So what they're going to do is they would keep their tail up to the end of the runway and then taxi off. So faster, more airplanes. Well, this guy below them wasn't following this SOP, and it was too late to try to go around. So Uncle Jack's C-47 lands on this other one. The pilot below advances his throttles on his engines, and one of the propellers tears up through the floorboards of the cockpit and tears away the rudder pedals from Uncle Jack's boots. So the two planes crash together. He and his pilot, Happy Shive, jump out. And then, fortunately, nobody was hurt or killed or injured or anything. And these two planes are crumpled there. And a major drives up in the Jeep and says, is it tough over France? And Uncle Jack's going, and he's just got hydraulic fluid over and stuff like that. Well, later on that night, Uncle Jack and Happy Shive, his pilot, they are in the officers' club at this base. And they see this pilot that are over there. So Uncle Jack was a feisty guy. He goes up and confronts this guy and says, why didn't you file the SOP? Why are you down there? And the guy looks at him and says, we don't do that at this base. Well, after the war, somehow Uncle Jack learns that this guy had become a pilot for American Airlines. And so for business, he would have to fly American Airlines very often. So when he would ask, who's the pilot of the plane? And they would say, oh, it's Captain, this guy. He'd say, I want another flight.
Hello, all you fellas, all over the world. Greetings from the Andrews sisters. I'm Patty. I'm Maxine. And I'm Laverne. We're making these beat discs just for you. And along with them, we want to send all our love and kisses. He was a famous trumpet man from out Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was the top man at his class. But then his number came up and he was going with the draft. He's in the army now, a blowing reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle for a company B. They made him blow a bugle for his uncle's fame. It really brought him down because they couldn't jam. The captain seemed to understand. Because the next day the cat went.
Robert Lawrence Green was born on July 24th, 1924 in Detroit, Michigan. In 1942, at the age of 17, he dropped out of high school and, with his father's permission, enlisted for war service in the U.S. Army. Leaving by train from Michigan Central Station in Detroit, he was sent to the receiving station at Fort Custer in Battle Creek. There he qualified for assignment to the Air Corps and was sent to the Air Corps Replacement Training Center at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, for basic training. He married Dolores Jane Dumas in 1950, and they had 2 boys, Jack Alden and Bobby Allen. Robert Lawrence Greene died of a heart attack on June 2, 1970 in Detroit.
Okay. My dad, like Uncle Jack and many, many young men of their generation, they were fixated on airplanes. Airplanes were glamorous. They were high tech. They were something they wanted to be associated with. And eventually they were. So at 17, Dad gets Grandpa Greene to sign off and lets him join the Army. And he applies for the Air Corps, is accepted to the Air Corps, becomes an airplane mechanic. Later on, he wanted to be a pilot like everybody, but at that time he had 20/20 vision, one eye 20/30 in the other. So he did qualify to be a pilot. Well, as the war went on, they needed more and more pilots. So they started giving out waivers on very slight eye things. So he applied for it, was accepted for pilot training. So he goes to San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center, which is now Lackland Air Force Base. Okay, where he goes to, was kind of like his little basic training to be he'd already been to Army basic training, but he had to go to Aviation Cadet basic training. Now, as I said, the San Antonio Aviation Cadet Center is now Lackland Air Force Base. I went through basic training at Lackland Air Force Base in 1975, and in 1977, I went to Air Force ROTC summer camp at Lackland Air Force Base. So it could have been in the same barracks that my dad was in during World War II. Okay, so he applies, but at the same time, he's in this pool. They have more than enough pilots. Okay, so he's kind of in limbo, and they put him on a flight line at a base at Victorville, California, which was later George Air Force Base. So he's just doing routine things, and they find out he had been an airplane mechanic. So the NCO in charge says, get out of aviation cadets, I'll give you a job here and stuff like that. And it says, no, I want to be a pilot, stuff like that. Well, finally they come down and they say, we have more than enough pilots. But what you can do is be a navigator bombardier, or we have a new program for the B-29 flight engineer. And the B-29 was the most advanced airplane of World War II. It was totally pressurized. It could fly farther, carry more bombs, and it was considered so complicated it needed a third pilot, which is this flight engineer. So they called that in, and they said, you were an airplane mechanic, so you have the background. We will put you in an accelerated B-29 flight engineer course. You'll get your wings sooner, and you can do that. So my dad told me, he says, well, I thought about it. I said, well, if I'm just going to fly in the airplane, I'll be the flight engineer. So he goes through this advanced flight engineer training course and graduates on September 2nd, 1945, the day the Japanese signed the surrender on the USS Missouri, ending the war.
All the day long, whether rain or shine, she's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory.
I was to make many mistakes before my downfall, but none, however spectacular, was more grave than my contempt that day for American women. How was it possible for America to achieve such production and at the same time build an army? The answer was that 20% of American industrial manpower was woman power. Legions of American women were massing to stop my advance across the world. It was the first time I had heard of the hidden army.
It may have been the first time, Herr Hitler, but it was not to be the last time. Millions and millions of women who had never lifted a finger outside their own homes now suddenly resolved to set the world house in order.
I go to college, but I arranged my classes so that I could help out in the war effort. This way I'll get my diploma and war bond. I have a daughter in the waves, and I had a son on the Arizona. That's a good enough reason for anyone. I was too heavy for the WAC, so I joined up in defense work. Yesterday was the big day of my life. The foreman told me I was worth my weight in gold.
Women of America, like the men at their side, must flock to war jobs and stick to their jobs until that day when an end has come to the devastation of the earth. That day when peace has come once more to all lands, and especially to the land at whose gate stands the finest warrior, the greatest woman of them all.
Ina Lee Green was born January 27, 1909 in Brockton, Illinois. She was Leroy and Winnie's second child and a welcome first daughter. After high school, she went to work for Uncle Otho at the Michigan Inspection Bureau, but when Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, she decided to join her brothers and brothers-in-law and signed up with the Women's Auxiliary Corps. She was never posted outside the United States and spent the duration at a stateside Army base. She never married, but had a wartime romance with a pilot named Mike, who was a friend of her brother Jack. She converted to Catholicism for Mike, but they didn't stay together, and nobody knows exactly why. After the war, she went to live in California, where most of the family had already relocated. She lived with Uncle Errol after his divorce, and after Grandpa died in 1952, they moved Grandma Green to live with them. Aunt Lee was taking the train to visit family in Michigan in 1981 when she became ill and had to turn back. She died February 26, 1982.
Aunt Lee. Okay, Aunt Lee is in her 30s. Aunt Lee joins the WAC. Okay, well, originally, the original WAC was the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, which Aunt Lee joins. But the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps had some problems because they weren't civilians, but they weren't members of the military either. So they didn't have the military benefits, they didn't have the military protections, they didn't have military priorities. So in 1943, the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps was authorized as the Women's Army Corps, and women were made part of the Army itself. With the Army's command structure, the pays, everything was the same. So Aunt Lee does this. And for a woman of that time, this was a very forward thing to do. And so she wanted to get in her effort and things of that, and you know, she wanted to join the effort too.
Aunt Lee was my godmother and my favorite person in the world, other than Grandmother Green, I guess. In fact, I went to live with Aunt Lee when things were getting tough. When I was a teenager, I went to California, went to high school there, living with her for almost a year. But she was mostly clerical. She wasn't a nurse or anything like that. She was mostly clerical. And she wrote very interesting letters to me as her godchild. And I do have some of the letters still. And she was a very, again, sweet person. She was like my second mother, actually.
On guard at the Panama Canal, Uncle Sam's vital water lifeline, joining the two great oceans of the world. Protection of this most important artery rests with many divisions. Its Air Force, searching eyes that look down from the sky, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Soldiers, sailors, and Marines are trained especially to guard this long, thin link, permitting quick disposition of naval units from one ocean to the other, allowing supply and merchant ships safe passage for their cargoes of war or peacetime.
Errol Leroy Green was born in Brockton, Illinois in August 1906 on the Old Green homestead. He was the first child of Leroy and Lucy. When he was 13, the family relocated to Northwest Detroit in Michigan. He was called Bub by his siblings, and at 16, he became one of the youngest graduates from Northwestern High School and then went on to graduate from the University of Michigan. He was in his 30s when he joined the Army, and because his expertise was electronics, he was sent to the Philippines, where he was aboard a ship in port working from an office. After the war, he settled in California, as most of our family veterans did. On July 22, 1946, he married Elizabeth Ardell Paulson, who had 2 boys around the ages of 8 and 10. However, they divorced after about 10 years of marriage. Uncle Bub died in California on March 26, 1983.
When the war starts, of course, Uncle Errol, who's in his 30s, of course, he joins up. He's in a very novel position. He's in the aircraft repair unit aboard a aircraft repair ship of the Army Air Forces, of which the Air Force has 6 of them.
Uncle Errol, when I went to live with Aunt Lee in 1951, Uncle Errol was married at the time, and he had 2 stepsons. He was a surprise because nobody had ever thought he would ever marry. Uncle Errol was really, we would call him a nerd nowadays. He was a very smart man, and he was married to a woman who was very, very outgoing and gregarious, which, they say opposites attract. And, but he told my brother the story of when he was mostly in radar and electronics. He was very smart that way. He was in the Philippines, and he was on a ship that was in port permanently. And then he had an office on the ship. And then he did his job on the ship, even though he was in the Army. He wasn't in the Navy, but he had an office on this ship. And one day when they were being bombed by Japan, apparently the bomb slid past the door of the office that he was in and slid off the side of the ship. And that was the nearest he came to disaster. But
Thomas Olmsted Palin Jr. was born December 11, 1916, in Detroit, Michigan, to Thomas Olmsted Palin and Lillian Elizabeth Hyder. Tom met Janice May Green through her sister, Betty, and he was immediately smitten and flooded her with cards and letters expressing his adoration. After high school graduation, 18-year-old Tommy and 20-year-old Jace, as he called her, were married on March 3, 1935. He immediately went to work for Uncle Otho at the Michigan Inspection Bureau, where most of the Green family worked. He was sent to the office in the Upper Peninsula, and Sally came along a year later on April 6, 1936. After many long commutes and both of them missing family, they relocated back to Detroit. Then, in 1949, Tom and Jace welcomed their second child, a boy named Thomas O. Palin III.
After everybody had signed up or said they were going to sign up, I think Dad wanted to sign up too. And when he did, he was told he didn't have to because they really didn't need him. He was a father and a husband. They wanted single men and they wanted younger men. So it was a couple of years before finally they said, we don't care how old you are or how many children you have, we need you. So that was when he was actually when he joined the Air Force. Dad left in the wintertime from the train station and Michigan Central. And Mom came up and woke me up, and it was colder than heck. It really was colder than heck. And it was way before dawn. It had to be about 4:30 in the morning. We had to get dressed. We went down to the station. Grandmother Green went. My mom, of course, and I went. And Grandpa Green went. When we got to the station, it was just jam-packed with soldiers and sailors and their crying people, the wives and their mothers and their sisters. And I remember that vividly because I knew my father was going to go away somewhere.
K-A-L-A-M-A-C-O. Oh, what a girl, a real pimperoo. I'll make my bed for that freckle-faced kid I'm hurrying to. I'm going to Michigan to see the sweetest girl in Kalamazoo.
Like everybody else, he wanted to join the Air Force. So he did. And he ended up on B-29s as a rear turret gunner. Now, that's not a very safe place to be. And I worried. Every day when I came home from school, I worried all the way home that there'd be a telegram there from someone that my dad had come to harm. Dad went on 4 missions, I think, because by the time he got there, it was 1944. So he only went on 4 missions of actually bombing. And he had only one happenstance, and that was when they dropped a bomb and the bomb bay door did not close properly. And Dad, who was in the rear of the plane, was hit in the leg with shrapnel that was being shot up from the Japanese side. He got a piece of shrapnel in his leg. But that was the worst that he got.
In Kalamazoo. K-A-L-A-M-A-Z-O. What a girl, a real pipperoo. We're going to Michigan to see the sweetest girl in Kalamazoo.
When my dad died, and it was February 29th, it was a leap year, 1959, he took his own life. It was not war related. It was not PTSD or whatever it is that they have now. It was just a question of things had gotten overwhelming for him, and he just decided that it was time to go. And at that time, Uncle Otho, Bob and my husband, Uncle Bob and my husband worked both at the Michigan Inspection Bureau. So what they did was he sent them up to the Kalamazoo because I had a child, a 4-year-old child, and I had a baby, foster baby, and I wasn't able to go. And he sent them to Kalamazoo to clean out the house, to send my dad's body back. And so it was a very hard time. But Uncle Bob and Uncle Otho both were instrumental in getting us through it.
Believe me, today we've been through some of the real stuff. The The fellas are asleep now. They're half dead with exhaustion. They're filthy with sweat and dirt. But take my word for it, Mom. They're grand soldiers, every one of them. There's Hank over there still fighting and asleep. I'll never forget how he tackled that machine gun nest on Hill 250. Late this afternoon, when we stormed this village, it was Tony who led the others, blazing his way through the streets like a one-man army. They're soldiers, Mom. Yesterday they were kids, but tonight they're soldiers.
Don't sit under the apple tree.
Charles Harold Waller was from a big farm in Newcastle, Indiana. He married Betty June Green, the fifth child of Leroy and Lucy. They were married on October 26, 1935. They had two children, Nancy Lee, born in 1940, and Charles Lynn, born in 1943. We don't have a lot of information on Uncle Harold, but we know that he served.
Harold was in a field artillery unit in the Philippines. During World War II, the Michigan Inspection Bureau put out a newsletter called Just Among Friends. And what it did is it listed all the employees who gave updates of what all the employees were doing in the service. And they would share like letters from your next, from servicemen and stuff like that. And Uncle Otho signed off on it all the time during the war. And Harold Waller was in that. And that's how I know he was in the field artillery.
They took the whole squadron to Tinian Island. Tinian Island was in the Marianas. The reason that the Marianas were in such need was because the Air Force wanted to put air bases on Saipan and Tinian and all the islands that were closer to Japan so they could get everyone closer to bombing Japan. So after the Marines cleared Saipan, Saipan was 3.5 miles away from Tinian. And after the Marines cleared that very horrifically, which I will not speak about, but people will know, they moved on to Tinian and cleared Tinian the same way. And Tinian was a small island, and it had mostly sugarcane plantations, and that was what the Japanese was where they were getting their sugarcane from. Well, after they cleared the island, then the Air Force moved in. The Seabees came in and made an airstrip, and the Air Force came in, and Dad lived in a tent. Now, it wasn't a tent like you would think, like a pup tent or something. It was 20 or 30 men in each one of these tents because they had no wooden barracks yet. The wooden barracks were for the officers or for the meeting places or whatever. The men themselves lived in the tents. And there was a lot of bad weather in that part of the world. There was often hurricane type things. And Dad had to run for safety from the tent many times. He told me about that. They didn't know for sure what their job was going to be on the island of Tinian. There was a huge population of B-29s on that island, and they were sent to do bombing raids. He told me about the time that into their port pulled the USS Indianapolis, a huge American ship. they were told that it was bringing supplies and food and things like that. In actuality, it was bringing parts for the atom bomb to be put together there on the island and put in the Enola Gay, which was also sitting on the island. Dad said it was surrounded by a fence. They were all looking at it. All of them would walk up to the fence, but nobody would tell them what the Enola Gay, another big plane, was doing there and why it was there, what its mission was. They were not told until the day that it actually took off. Everybody knows the story of the Indianapolis. Dad talked about that. He didn't talk much about any of the things that happened to him on Tinian, but as I got older, he opened up a little more. The ship was sent in, it was off the radar, in other words. Nobody knew where it was going. And after it had delivered the parts from the atom bomb, for the atom bomb to the island, it left, but it didn't give its directions where it was going. It was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine, and everyone knows the story of the USS Indianapolis. 1,800 men went into the water. 5 days later, 300 were rescued. They'd been attacked by sharks or water or sun or whatever. And so that story has always resonated with me.
I have received this afternoon a message from the Japanese government in reply to the message forwarded to that government by the Secretary of State on August 11th. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
It was an exciting day, and I've never forgotten it. Uncle Otho took every one of us that was available down to his offices, and we traveled up to the 40th floor and could look out the windows at all the people. And there was millions of people throwing paper out of the windows and kissing and hugging and screaming, and bells were chiming. Everybody was blowing their horns. And we leaned out those windows and watched all of that. And I remember being so excited because I knew my dad was going to be coming home.
I know my father, Jack's father, Sally's father, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles would all be so happy to know that their legacy is being preserved in this documentary. I was born years after the war ended. In fact, 1 year after Grandpa Green died. My middle name is Lou, L-U, Linda Lou, for Leroy Ulysses. And that's all I have ever known, really, of Grandpa Green. But in any case, it was, to me, a patriotic time and a very patriotic generation that has left us with wonderful history and connection that we're still learning from. I'm very happy to be a part of this project in a small way. And I'm very proud of all of our family members and their contributions. So thank you for watching.
I'm so glad that you called this documentary Our Family Heroes, because that is exactly what they were and have been in many, many wars. And I will mention a few of them, those that we know of. I'm sure somebody out there in our family knows of others. But the one I would start with is Desert Storm. Our cousin Jack was in Desert Storm. Then, of course, we go to Korea. Then we go to the World War II, naturally, where this is about. Then we go to the Civil War, where we had a grandfather who died at Andersonville in prison there. And we go from there to the Revolutionary War, where we have a grandfather who was in George Washington's army, and we have a letter from George Washington to him. Then we have the Indian War at the Raisin River. Now, I'm not sure exactly what war that was, but that was what it was called. They participated in that. Then we go to England because our grandfather Henry Spillman came here in 1516, and the family was in England originally. They fought at Bosworth Field with the death of Richard III, and they were also participants in the War of the Roses. So altogether, this family has always risen to the occasion when needed and stepped right in to do whatever they had to do to support victory in their countries, whatever their countries were.
The Green family was a very typical family of the 1940s. And like many families that time, in fact, virtually all families were thrust into an extraordinary time and challenge, which they all met and contributed to. So while they themselves would not have looked themselves as heroes, I'm just doing my part, would be their attitude. To our following generations, they are heroes.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
He makes When it plays merrily, he's a boogie woogie bugle boy, come play me.